The evening air in the small Italian town was warm, carrying with it the faint scent of fresh basil and the distant hum of laughter from nearby cafes. It should have been a perfect moment, a picturesque backdrop for what I had hoped would be a peaceful lunch with Gabriel and his friends. But instead, it became the stage for my unraveling. It started with a fight, one that began innocuously enough over lunch but quickly escalated into something far uglier. Gabriel's college buddies, celebrating their annual reunion, egged him on as our argument grew heated. "You're always controlling her," Pete sneered between sips of wine, his words slurring but cutting deep. When I stood up to leave, Gabriel followed me outside, his anger precise despite his drunken state. Years of resentment bubbled to the surface. My stifled dreams, his dismissive comments about my career, the constant need to manage every detail of our life together. "You'll figure it out," he spat before climbing into the driver's seat of our rental car. The cruel irony of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. My purse sat abandoned on the cafe table, still holding my passport, phone charger, and credit cards, all now locked away in his wallet. He'd offered earlier to carry them, insisting my small purse was too full. I hadn't thought twice about it then. Now, standing frozen on the cobblestone street as the taillights of the car disappeared around the bend, I realized just how thoroughly he had planned this. At first, I told myself it was a joke, that he'd return within the hour, apologetic but smug. But as night fell and reality sank in, panic clawed at my chest. This wasn't just abandonment, it was calculated cruelty. The charming Italian town that had seemed so inviting by day now felt menacing under the dim glow of streetlights. Locals enjoying their evening meals glanced curiously at me, their murmured conversations fading into the background as I frantically dialed Gabriel's number. 27 calls later, all sent straight to voicemail, I knew there was no turning back. With only €80 in cash and $37 in crumpled bills stuffed into my pocket, I wandered aimlessly through unfamiliar streets, searching for any semblance of hope. Every hotel room was beyond my meager budget, and even the cheapest pension came with a price tag I couldn't afford. Desperation led me to a dingy pawnshop tucked away in an alley. Inside, the musty smell of old wood and tarnished metal greeted me. Trembling hands twisted off the diamond ring Gabriel had given me on our 5th anniversary, a symbol of everything we were supposed to be, and placed it on the counter. "I need money," I whispered hoarsely, my voice barely audible over the ticking clock behind the shopkeeper. His eyes gleamed as he examined the ring, turning it over in his fingers before offering me a fraction of its worth. My protest fell on deaf ears. Clutching the paltry sum, I stepped back onto the street, feeling more alone than ever. The next challenge came when I boarded a bus bound for Greece. Exhaustion weighed heavily on my shoulders, exacerbated by the sweltering heat and lack of water. Crossing a highway to reach the station nearly cost me my life. A truck horn blared inches from my head as I stumbled backward, heart pounding wildly. On the bus itself, relief was short-lived. A group of rowdy tourists, drunk and loud, took notice of me almost immediately. Their lewd comments and invasive stares made sleep impossible. Each time the bus jolted or slowed, I tensed, half expecting them to follow through on their threats. By the time I reached Greece, my body ached from sitting upright for hours, unwilling to let my guard down. My mind raced with questions. How could Gabriel do this? Did he truly believe I'd come crawling back once I learned my lesson? And most importantly, what was I going to do now? But amidst the fear and uncertainty, a flicker of something unexpected began to take root, a fragile sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I was untethered from Gabriel's control. There were no expectations, no carefully curated schedules, no demands to meet. Just me stranded in a foreign country, forced to confront the person I had become, and the person I might yet be. The olive grove stretched endlessly before me, its silver-green leaves shimmering like whispers in the breeze. I had wandered far from the village that day, lured by the promise of solitude and the soothing rhythm of nature. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ancient trees, exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave. My blistered feet throbbed with every step, my body weakened by dehydration and hunger. The world tilted dangerously as my knees buckled beneath me, and I collapsed onto the cool earth, darkness swallowing me whole. When I awoke, it was to the sound of rain pelting against my skin. The cold seeped into my bones, each drop an icy reminder of how vulnerable I truly was. My clothes clung to me, soaked through, and my teeth chattered uncontrollably. I tried to move, but my limbs felt impossibly heavy, as though they belonged to someone else. Panic clawed at my chest. Was this how it would end? Alone, abandoned again, this time not by Gabriel but by fate itself? Hours passed, Or perhaps it was only minutes. Time seemed irrelevant in my delirium. Consciousness flickered in and out, punctuated by flashes of fear and regret. Just when I thought I might succumb to the elements, a voice cut through the storm. Fos mau Kira. Elena's cry echoed through the grove, followed by the crunch of footsteps on wet soil. Strong hands turned me over, and I blinked up at her weathered face, illuminated faintly by the dim light of a lantern. Behind her stood Nikos, his expression grim as he assessed my condition. They wrapped me in a thick woolen blanket and carried me back to their farmhouse using an old agricultural cart. The journey felt endless, each bump jolting me painfully, yet I clung to consciousness, afraid of slipping away. When we arrived, Elena pressed her hand to my forehead, her eyes widening in alarm. "Creo," she muttered, shaking her head. "Cold." She rushed about the kitchen, heating water and mixing herbs into a steaming concoction. Nikos hovered nearby, his presence steady and reassuring despite his limited English. 4 hours they worked tirelessly to warm me, feeding me small sips of broth and massaging warmth back into my extremities. It wasn't until morning that I regained enough strength to speak. Sitting upright in bed, wrapped in layers of blankets, I attempted to explain myself. My voice trembled as I recounted my story: Gabriel's betrayal, the abandonment in Italy, my desperate journey to Greece. Tears streamed down my face as I spoke, each word raw with emotion. At first, skepticism clouded their expressions. Who wouldn't doubt a stranger who appeared out of nowhere, speaking broken Greek and carrying tales of heartbreak? But something in my vulnerability must have struck a chord. Elena placed a gentle hand on mine, her gaze softening. "Kai ana mero gia tin Sophia," she murmured, glancing at a photograph on the mantel. For Sophia. Her daughter, lost to them years ago. In that moment I understood. I wasn't just another outsider seeking refuge. To them I represented a chance to fill the void left by their absent child. As days turned into weeks, I began integrating into their lives, learning the rhythms of farm work. But the transition wasn't without its challenges. On my second day, while attempting to prune branches, I sliced my hand open with a rusty knife. Blood dripped onto the dirt, and panic surged as I realized I couldn't communicate what had happened. Elena rushed to my side, her movements efficient as she cleaned and bandaged the wound. "Careful," she instructed sternly, pointing to the knife. Lesson learned. Then came the bees. Harvesting honey should have been simple, but I underestimated their territorial instincts. A swarm descended upon me during my first attempt, stinging my arms and neck until I fled screaming toward the house. Nikos laughed heartily at my misfortune, though his amusement faded when he saw the angry welts covering my skin. He applied a homemade salve, his touch surprisingly gentle for such rugged hands. But the worst came unexpectedly, a bout of food poisoning that left me bedridden for 3 days. The unfamiliar spices and rich flavors of local cuisine proved too much for my unaccustomed stomach. Elena sat by my bedside, pressing a cool cloth to my forehead and murmuring prayers in Greek. Her concern was palpable, and guilt gnawed at me for causing them so much trouble. One night, unable to sleep, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos. There I was, standing beside Gabriel at a charity gala, dressed in an expensive gown and adorned with jewelry. My hair was styled perfectly, my makeup flawless. I stared at the image, tears welling in my eyes. How had I let myself become this person? Someone defined by appearances, by Gabriel's expectations? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent years molding myself into what he wanted, sacrificing pieces of my identity along the way. Moments later, I heard voices drifting from the kitchen. Elena and Nikos were arguing softly, their tones hushed but urgent. Creeping closer, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Too fragile," Elena said, gesturing animatedly. "She won't last." Nikos shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "Give her time," he replied. Their words stung, but instead of despair, they ignited a fire within me. If they doubted me, then I would prove them wrong. The next morning, I rose before dawn, determined to show them I could handle whatever life threw at me. I joined Nikos in the fields, mimicking his movements as he taught me to identify weeds among the crops. My hands blistered anew, but I refused to complain. Each task completed, no matter how small, felt like a victory. Slowly, I began earning their trust, and more importantly, my own respect. Elena noticed the change in me. One evening, as we sat together shelling peas, she smiled warmly. "Strong now," she said, patting my arm. Her approval meant everything, a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in uncertainty. And for the first time in months, maybe even years, I believed her. The days blurred into weeks, each sunrise bringing me closer to a life I hadn't imagined but was beginning to love. The olive groves became my sanctuary, their ancient trees whispering secrets of resilience and endurance. Yet beneath the surface of this newfound peace lay challenges that tested not only my strength but also my resolve. It started when Elena handed me their ledger one evening, her expression unusually somber. "Numbers," she said simply, pointing to the worn pages filled with neat handwriting. As I pored over the entries, my heart sank. Debts, mountains of them, loomed like storm clouds over the farm. Loans from the local bank stretched back years, interest compounding silently while Elena and Nikos focused on survival rather than strategy. "This is serious," I murmured, looking up at them. Elena nodded grimly, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. "Bank wants payment soon. If no money," she trailed off, gesturing toward the fields, the farmhouse, everything they had built together. I felt anger rise within me, not at them but at the unfairness of it all. How could such hardworking people face losing everything because of circumstances beyond their control? My mind raced as I considered solutions. Back in Boston, I'd managed budgets for charity events and streamlined operations for design projects. Surely I could apply those skills here. That night, under the flickering light of an oil lamp, I drafted a plan. Using my laptop, a relic from my old life, I created digital spreadsheets to track expenses, sales, and inventory more efficiently. I proposed expanding their market reach by listing products online and partnering with eco-friendly brands seeking sustainable suppliers. But when I presented these ideas to Elena and Nikos, skepticism shadowed their faces. "Change is good," I insisted, showing them graphs illustrating potential growth. "We can keep traditions but adapt." Still, resistance came not just from them but from others in the village. At the weekly market, Stavros, the taverna owner who had once been an ally, shook his head disapprovingly. "Foreign ways," he muttered, loud enough for me to hear. "Not right for our land." The criticism stung, but I refused to back down. This wasn't about imposing modernity, it was about survival. Over coffee with Yana, the weaver, I vented my frustrations. "They think I'm trying to erase their culture," I said bitterly. "They don't trust easily," Yana replied gently. "But give them time. Show them results, not promises." Her words stayed with me, fueling my determination. Slowly, small victories emerged. A redesigned label caught the attention of tourists, boosting sales. An Instagram account I set up garnered followers intrigued by our traditional methods. Even Stavros softened when orders from his taverna increased thanks to our improved branding. Amidst these efforts, moments of introspection crept in. One evening, as I sat beneath an olive tree, its gnarled roots stretching like arms into the earth, memories flooded back. Gabriel's voice echoed in my mind. "Interior design? It's just a hobby, Alexis. We don't need the money, and I need you focused on our life." I clenched my fists, the weight of those words pressing down on me. He hadn't just dismissed my career, he had systematically dismantled it. Each project I abandoned, each client I turned away, had chipped away at my identity until I became exactly what he wanted. A perfect wife, polished and obedient. But here, surrounded by the raw beauty of rural Greece, I saw clearly how far I'd fallen, and how much farther I could climb. That night, I reopened my laptop and began sketching designs again, not for Gabriel's approval but for myself. Ideas flowed freely, unburdened by expectations or constraints. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Then came the email that shattered my fragile peace. Gabriel's name appeared on my screen, accompanied by cold, clinical words. "I know where you are." My breath hitched as I read his message. He was coming, to Greece to bring me home. Panic surged through me, followed swiftly by anger. After months of silence, of rebuilding my life brick by brick, he dared to waltz back in as if nothing had changed? Elena noticed my distress immediately. "Bad news?" she asked softly, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Gabriel," I choked out. "He's coming here." Her eyes narrowed slightly before she reached beneath the kitchen table and pulled out an envelope. Inside were legal papers, the partnership agreement we'd signed weeks ago. "Good timing then," she said firmly. "You choose now. Not him." Her words steadied me, but the days leading up to his arrival were fraught with tension. I visited Katerina, the village lawyer, to ensure the divorce papers were ready. I updated my resume and tentatively accepted the remote consulting position offered by my former mentor. Every action was a declaration. I would not return to the person I used to be. On the morning Gabriel arrived, the air buzzed with anticipation. Elena, Nikos, and I stood together, united against whatever storm he intended to unleash. When his sleek rental car rolled into view, I felt a strange mix of fear and defiance. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. As he stepped out of the car, sunglasses perched arrogantly on his nose, I realized something profound. Gabriel didn't scare me anymore. The sound of Gabriel's rental car engine shattered the peaceful afternoon. I stood frozen for a moment, my hands still coated with olive oil from testing samples. The familiar arrogance in his approach, a sleek silver sedan gliding up the dirt road, was jarring against the humble backdrop of Elena and Nikos' farmhouse. When Gabriel stepped out of the car, sunglasses perched arrogantly on his nose, I barely recognized him. His tailored chinos and expensive button-down shirt screamed wealth and privilege, but beneath the polished exterior, there was something different about him. Lines creased his forehead that hadn't been there months ago, and his once confident stance seemed stiff, almost brittle. It was as if the weight of everything, the abandonment, the scandal, the relentless pursuit to fix me, had aged him prematurely. "Alexis," he called, his voice carrying across the grove. My name sounded foreign on his lips, like an echo from another life. He scanned the property dismissively, his gaze lingering on the modest stone house and weathered barn before finally landing on me. I wiped my hands on my work apron and walked toward him, deliberately slow. Each step felt deliberate, grounding me in this new reality where I no longer owed him anything. Not my loyalty, not my silence, not even my attention. "You look different," he said, removing his sunglasses. His eyes traveled over me, taking in my sun-browned arms, calloused hands and simple ponytail. There was disbelief in his expression, quickly masked by condescension. "What happened to you? This isn't who you are." "This is who I am now," I replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "And it's who I've always wanted to be, if you'd ever bothered to notice." His jaw tightened. "This isn't a game, Alexis. You can't just throw away 10 years of marriage because of some childish stunt. Come home. Let's put this behind us." "Put it behind us?" I repeated, incredulous. "You abandoned me in a foreign country, Gabriel. As a joke. Do you really think we can just move past that?" He took a step closer, reaching for my arm. Instinctively, I pulled back, shouting in Greek, "Don't touch me." The word startled both of us. Gabriel blinked, confused, while Elena and Nikos appeared at the doorway, their presence steady and protective. A few villagers passing by stopped to watch, drawn by the commotion. "Stop making a scene," Gabriel hissed, his composure cracking. "Do you have any idea how this looks? People are talking, your parents, my clients, everyone. Don't you care about our reputation?" "Our reputation?" I laughed bitterly. "That's all you ever cared about, wasn't it? Not me, not my happiness, just appearances. Well, let me tell you something, I don't need your reputation anymore. I've built a life here, one that doesn't revolve around pleasing you or anyone else." Gabriel's face flushed with anger. "So what? You're going to stay here forever, playing farmer? Is this really what makes you happy? Living in poverty, hauling olives under the sun?" "It's more than that," I shot back. "It's purpose. It's connection. It's freedom. Things I never had with you." Before he could respond, Elena approached, pressing the partnership agreement into my hand. Though she couldn't follow our heated exchange, she sensed the gravity of the moment. I unfolded the document and held it out to Gabriel. "I'm legally tied to this place now," I said firmly. "A business partnership. Responsibilities to people who value me for my contributions, not my social status or appearance. This is my life now." Gabriel stared at the papers, his expression darkening. "This is insane. You'd give up everything, for this?" "I'm not giving up anything," I countered. "I'm choosing something better. Something real." Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out the envelope containing the divorce papers Katerina had prepared. Handing them to Gabriel, I added, "These are already filed. Provisions for asset division are included. Everything is final." He clutched the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. For a moment, he looked lost, like a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. Then desperation flickered in his eyes. "Fine," he snapped. "If you won't come to your senses, maybe this will change your mind." From his wallet, he produced a check, scribbling a staggering amount onto it. "Here. Take it. Start over somewhere else. Do whatever you want. Just, don't embarrass me anymore." The check fluttered to the ground as I tore it into pieces, letting the scraps fall like confetti. "I don't need your money," I said, my voice steady. "I don't need anything from you. Not anymore." For the first time since I'd known him, Gabriel looked truly defeated. His shoulders slumped and the mask of confidence slipped entirely. Behind him, the gathered villagers murmured among themselves, their disapproval palpable. Nikos stepped forward then, speaking in Greek. Gabriel frowned, clearly unsettled. "What did he say?" he demanded. "He said the road back to Athens is dangerous after dark," I translated. "You should leave now if you want to reach the city before nightfall." Gabriel hesitated, glancing between me, Elena, Nikos, and the villagers watching silently. Finally he turned on his heel and climbed back into his car. As the engine roared to life, rain began to pour, drenching the landscape. I watched as the taillights disappeared down the muddy road, feeling a strange mix of relief and triumph. But the story wasn't quite over yet. Later that evening, Yana came rushing to the house, breathless with news. "There's been an accident," she said. "On the highway near Athens. A silver car matching your husband's description hit a guardrail. No serious injuries but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Gabriel's reckless drive, fueled by anger and pride, had ended in a minor collision, a fitting metaphor for his failed attempt to control me. That night, as I sat on the porch with Elena and Nikos, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside me, but it was clearing now, leaving behind fresh air and endless possibilities. The days following Gabriel's departure were a blur of emotions: relief, triumph, and an unexpected sense of peace. For the first time in months, I felt truly free, unshackled from the weight of his control and expectations. Elena and Nikos seemed to sense this shift within me. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, they surprised me with a small celebration. The table was set beneath the ancient olive tree that had become my sanctuary, its gnarled branches casting long shadows across the grove. Plates of grilled fish, freshly baked bread, and homemade olive oil adorned the surface, accompanied by bottles of local wine. Elena hummed softly before breaking into song, a traditional Greek folk tune about resilience and renewal. Her voice carried through the cool night air, joined soon by Nikos's deep baritone. Though I couldn't understand all the words, their meaning transcended language. It was a hymn of survival, of finding light in darkness. For the first time since arriving in Greece, I allowed myself to fully embrace the moment. I laughed freely, clinked glasses with them, and even attempted to sing along, mangling the lyrics but earning hearty chuckles from both. As we sat together under the stars, sharing stories and laughter, I realized something profound: I belonged here. Not just as a worker or a guest but as family. These people, who had taken me in when I was at my lowest, had given me more than shelter. They had given me purpose, acceptance, and love. The next morning, buoyed by the warmth of the previous night, I decided it was time to confront another unresolved chapter of my life. Sitting at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, I pulled out my laptop and began drafting a letter to my parents. The cursor blinked on the blank screen, taunting me, but I forced myself to start. "Dear Mom and Dad," I typed, my fingers trembling slightly over the keys. "I owe you both an apology, for disappearing, for not reaching out sooner, for making you worry. But most of all, for letting fear keep me silent." As I wrote, memories flooded back. Their concerned calls that went unanswered, the holidays missed, the birthdays forgotten. Yet instead of guilt overwhelming me, I found clarity. I explained everything: Gabriel's betrayal, my journey to Greece, the struggles and triumphs that had shaped my new life. I told them about Elena and Nikos, about the olive groves and the community that had embraced me. And finally, I confessed my decision to stay, to build a future rooted in independence and authenticity. To my surprise, their response arrived sooner than expected. My father's handwriting filled the pages of the letter, steady and reassuring. "We're proud of you, Alexis," he wrote. "It takes courage to leave behind what no longer serves you and forge a new path. Your mother and I have always loved you fiercely, and nothing will change that. Not distance, not silence, not even Gabriel." Tears streamed down my face as I read their words. Their support wasn't just validation, it was liberation. They understood. They forgave. And they believed in me. With renewed determination, I threw myself into work, balancing my responsibilities at the farm with the remote consulting position I'd tentatively accepted weeks earlier. The sustainable building materials company turned out to be a perfect fit, allowing me to merge my design expertise with my newfound appreciation for eco-friendly practices. Each project I completed remotely became a bridge between my past and present, proving that I could honor my creative passions while embracing the simplicity of rural life. One afternoon, as I stood in the middle of the olive grove overseeing the harvest, I paused to take in the scene around me. The workers moved rhythmically, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. Beyond the fields, the village bustled with activity, children playing, women chatting, men tending to livestock. This place, once foreign and intimidating, now felt like home. Elena approached, her arms laden with baskets of olives. She smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good day?" she asked simply. "The best," I replied, returning her smile. That evening, as I reflected on how far I'd come, I thought about Gabriel. His actions, so cruel and calculated, had ultimately been the catalyst for my transformation. If he hadn't abandoned me, I might still be trapped in that gilded cage, pretending to be someone I wasn't. Instead, I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, built connections that nourished my soul, and created a life that was authentically mine. Standing beneath the same olive tree where we'd celebrated just days earlier, I gazed up at the stars. The scars of my past remained, but they no longer defined me. They were reminders of battles fought and won, of lessons learned and growth achieved. Sometimes, I whispered to the night, the cruelest actions yield the greatest gifts. And with that, I turned back toward the farmhouse, ready to face whatever tomorrow held, confident, independent, and whole.